Chapter 11, Part 2, Motivation and Emotion. In this video, we're going to look at hunger and weight regulation, and the four parts to that are the physiology of hunger, psychological aspects of hunger, environmental and cultural factors, and obesity. There's a total of 20 slides in this video, and 10 of those slides are about the physiology of hunger, so that's what that little asterisk is. It's sort of the most dense section. So just sort of indicating that. And let's get started. So the physiology of hunger. So biology provides the push. We talked about push and pull in the first section, perspectives on motivation, right? So the internal push, which biology provides, and then the pull, which is external, which is things like flavor and smell, pulling towards eating food, right? So there's many biological, psychological, and environmental factors that impact our food intake, how much we take in. A few terms to talk about. Metabolism, I'm sure you've heard, is the body's rate of energy utilization. 2/3 of our energy goes towards basal metabolism. So what is basal metabolism? That is the resting metabolic work of the body cells. So basal metabolism is the rate at which the body utilizes energy when you're just sitting still, or just basically to maintain your regular body processes without doing exercising, without doing anything else. Set point, that'll come up again. When they talk about set point, they used to think that your body had a certain weight at which it regulates fat mass and energy utilization, everything, right? Homeostatic mechanisms alter energy utilization and hunger to return as close to the original weight. So it is your set point weight. Maybe your set point weight is 160, 180, 120. So that is the set point to which your body's always trying to get back to. More current thinking is that there's not one set point, but rather a settling point, which is a range of weight, not just one static point. Several mechanisms try to keep your body in energy homeostasis by regulating your food intake. There are short-term signals and long-term signals. Short-term signals start making you want to eat by producing hunger, right? The feeling of hunger. And then another short-term signal is stop meal by producing the feeling of being full. Long-term signals. Long-term signals monitors based on how much fat you have, and adjust your appetite and metabolism to compensate for when you overeat or do not eat enough. This will become more clear, okay? Especially the long-term signals. We're going to talk a little bit about that, well, all about that, in the next 6 slides. So information all interacts many signals. So what that means is that there's not one signal that signals you to eat or become hungry or stop eating or to feel full. It's an interaction of many signals. Just some basic points that were made here is that hunger is not necessarily linked to immediate energy needs. So it's not that your body simply needs energy, so therefore you're hungry. It's a lot more complex than that. Homeostatic mechanisms prevent you from running low on energy. So your body has these homeostatic mechanisms. They won't let you run so low on energy that you have none, and you're going to die. It just won't happen. Your body's always fighting for survival, so it's going to alert you long before that ever happens. Set point, which we just talked about, internal physiological standard around which the body weight is regulated. It's like a thermostat, right? But thermostat's for heat. So if your house is set at 20, it's always, when it gets really hot, it's going to cool off to get to 20. And if it gets really cold, then the furnace is going to turn on and try to get it back to 20. So set point is the point at which your body is set to be normal for your body. And then we mentioned that they're now thinking it's more of a settling point. So instead of being 20, it might be somewhere between 18 and 22. So more of a range. So what signals your body to become hungry or to start a meal, or signals your body to be full and to stop eating? So this experiment, this is discussed on page 391. What he did was he swallowed a balloon and inflated it. So you can see here, there's his stomach, and he inflated the balloon so that the balloon is all around the periphery of the stomach, touching the stomach walls. And obviously he stood there for quite some time. Whenever he felt hungry, just experienced the feeling of being hungry, he would press the key. The findings of this study, and it was recorded, right? Whatever was happening in his stomach. Any pressure or changes on the balloon was recorded. And now my cursor is not moving. The findings revealed that the stomach contractions did correspond to the feelings of hunger. But the question is, did they cause the experience of hunger? So just because your stomach contracts, does that make you feel hungry? That's the question. So other research shows humans and animals experience hunger even when they have no stomach, is the other part they're talking about. So in rats and animals, say they remove the stomach, and the rats were still shown to experience the feeling of hunger. And in humans, where perhaps the nerves from the stomach to the brain had been severed after an accident or something like that, they still experience the feeling of hunger. So it can't just be contractions in the stomach make you think you're hungry, because in the case where animals or humans have no stomach or connection to their stomach, they still do feel that. So there must be something else. So what else is there? Other signals. So other signals that the text talks about is glucose, stomach and intestinal distension, and CCK and other peptides. So let's talk about glucose first. So glucose is a key nutrient and a basic sugar. The body and brain's major source of immediately reusable fuel. So what happens is after you eat, your liver, like some glucose is sent to your cells because it's energy, right? And then some is sent to your liver, and that is converted into other nutrients and also stored for later use. Sensors in the hypothalamus and the liver monitor your glucose levels in your blood. So when the hypothalamus and the liver detect that your glucose level in your blood is low, it signals your liver to convert the stored nutrients back to glucose and put back into your blood. So what this does is it creates a drop rise glucose pattern. So it goes up and down and up and down. And this glucose drop rise generates feelings of hunger. Okay. All right, stomach and intestinal distension. What this one is that when you eat and the food goes into your stomach and into your intestines, the walls stretch. And when the walls stretch like that, the nerves send signals to your brain that you're full. Now, what's interesting about this, and probably noteworthy, is that it's not just that the walls have stretched. Nutrient-rich foods, they signal more quickly. They signal the brain that you're full more quickly than junk food. So the same amount, right? So what that means is that some signals respond to the food content, not just that the food is there, but what is the content of the food. And if it's nutrient-rich food, it's going to signal the brain more quickly. So obviously you can eat a lot more chips and junk before your brain gets that signal than if you were eating a healthy meal. CCK and other peptides. These are released by the small intestine into the bloodstream when the food arrives in the stomach. CCK stimulates peripheral nerves that send signals to the brain that you're full. So just to clarify, you eat food, and when you do that, CCK is released into the bloodstream, and it stimulates activity in the peripheral nerves, and it sends signal to the brain. So basically, CCK decreases feelings of hunger and reduces food intake. So remember, CC reduces feelings of hunger and food intake. This chart is in your textbooks on page 392, and it talks about all the different signals that your body or that your brain receives and your body receives that either increase your hunger or decrease your hunger. We've talked about glucose. We've talked a little about CCK. Glucose, remember that it increases and decreases. CCK decreases. And in the next section, we're going to talk about leptin. We're going to talk about the other two as well. But just remember that this is the chart that you're expected to know, and the sources and the effect on your feelings of hunger or fullness. Okay, continuing with signals that regulate general appetite and weight. Here we're going to talk about leptin. Sort of bottom lined it down here at the bottom. Fat cells secrete leptin. Leptin signals the brain, lots of fat, eat less. Okay. So fat cells, they actively regulate food intake and weight by secreting leptin. So when the fat cells, when they detect that there's too much fat going on, they secrete leptin that tells the brain to stop eating and increase energy expenditure. They did an experiment with rats, as they usually do, whereby the gene OB, which obese gene, normally detects fat cells to produce leptin. These rats have an OB gene mutation, which basically means they're not going to secrete leptin, which means that nothing's telling their brain to stop eating. So as they gain weight, their brains don't receive this signal to stop, and they just keep eating, and eventually they become obese. So without leptin, they'll keep eating. Then what they did was inject the rats, I believe it was 3 times a day, with leptin. And what happened was their appetites were decreased and their energy levels increased, and the mice became thinner. Brain mechanisms. Different parts of the brain, many different parts of the brain, are involved with the regulation of food intake. If you were to try to focus in on one particular area, that was, maybe the control center, it's often thought of as the hypothalamus. We're going to talk about the lateral hypothalamus and the ventromedial hypothalamus, and then the other area that's considered important is the paraventricular nucleus. The lateral hypothalamus is involved in stimulating eating, where the ventromedial hypothalamus is influential in stopping eating. It used to be thought that the lateral hypothalamus, these were like switches. So when the lateral hypothalamus was, turned on, They would eat when it's turned off. They would stop in ventromedial. They would stop eating when the ventromedial hypothalamus was switched. So like switches. But experiments that they did again with rats demonstrated that that is not true. They are significantly involved in the process of stimulating and stopping eating, but it is not as simple as a switch. The paraventricular nucleus, that is a cluster of neurons packed with receptor sites for various neurotransmitters that stimulate or reduce appetite. Okay, so it's sitting there. It's just covered in these receptor sites waiting for different neurotransmitters to come along and either say start eating or stop eating. One such transmitter is neuropeptide Y, which is found to be a very powerful appetite stimulant. And of course, we're going to talk more about that. So an experiment done with rats to do with neuropeptide Y. Basically, they took these rats and they injected them with neuropeptide Y 3 times a day across 10 days. So the effect was that the rats doubled their food intake, tripled their fat mass, and their whole body weight increased by 6. So demonstrating what a powerful appetite stimulant neuropeptide Y is. Okay, so one thing that the text points out as fascinating about how leptin and the PVN in rats, how they interact to explain why we get so hungry when we're trying to lose weight. I see this as a real life, real world application, and therefore maybe it would come up on a test or something. So if you understand this, you may better be prepared to get the answer correct when perhaps the question is directed towards, say, teenagers increasing or decreasing their weight. Anyways, so what it's saying is, it's talking about why do we get so hungry when we're trying to lose weight, right? And what they're saying is when leptin reaches the hypothalamus, remember leptin is the signal that says there's too much fat, reduce your appetite. Okay, so leptin inhibits the release of the neuropeptide Y and it reduces the appetite. But when rats lose fat, less leptin is secreted, and therefore the neuropeptide Y neurons become more active, which increases your appetite. So it turns into this sort of circle with these neurotransmitters. So this is at the bottom of page 393 when they're talking about this. A little hard to wrap your brain around at first, but spend some time trying to understand that and how that works, because I do see that as something that will come up on a test, perhaps. Okay, so that is the end of the physiology of hunger, and now we're going to look at the psychological aspects of hunger, which is a slightly shorter section. We talked about behavioral perspective, which is how eating is positively reinforced by good taste and negatively reinforced by hunger reduction. Hoping everybody remembers what that means. Positive reinforcement means you increase the likelihood of a behavior because you introduce something. So it's positively reinforced because it's introducing good taste. Negative reinforcement means you increase the likelihood of a behavior because, negatively, something is removed. So what is removed with hunger it's the feeling of hunger. From the cognitive perspective, which we discussed in part 1, expectations that eating will be pleasurable and reduce hunger stimulate eating. So one of the motivations for eating from the cognitive perspective is that you anticipate that it's going to be pleasure, and you anticipate and you believe that it's going to reduce your hunger. So what we're going to focus on in this little section here is the psychological aspect of hunger, which are the beliefs, memories, and attitude about food, and how that can affect your eating. In our society, there's a lot of pressure for thinness, especially in North America, the cultural standards of beauty. There's an overestimation of thinness for attractiveness. And they have this picture here. So before 1950, long before 1950, this was how beautiful women were portrayed, right? A little heavier, wrinkles and faults and cellulite and whatnot. And then a little bit later even, this was the ideal body figure, woman's figure, right? Slightly more full. The text talks a little bit about objectification theory and how what that's talking about is how people view their own bodies as an object. So they view their bodies as other people would see them. So starting in the 1950s and moving forward, there's a cultural pressure for women towards an unrealistic ideal female body shape, which is very thin. If you look at the pictures even of Marilyn Monroe, who was one of the, I believe, the most beautiful and sexiest women of all time, and she was even a little plumper, a little heavier, a little more voluptuous. But as time has gone by, this is now the ideal. Not only do you have to be ultra thin, but now you also have to be ultra fit. Women have been increasingly dissatisfied with their body as compared to men. There seems to be more pressure on women than men, or women put more pressure on themselves. And we're going to see that in the next study. And the norm of thin equals attractive has evolved as illustrated by this model. It is nice to see, however, that when you're looking at places like Aerie and La Vie en Rose and those other the other markets that target females, particularly between the ages of 15 and 30, say, their marketing now has larger, more full-figured women, and they're not doing touch-ups as much. So you will see cellulite, you will see other natural flaws in the pictures. A study by Fallon and Rose in 1985. They took a group of women and they took a group of men, and they put a scale. So on the top one, you see women from 2. Sorry, on the far left, there's a 2, which is very thin. Far right, which is a 5, which is larger. And then the 2 in betweens. So they took the women and they said, okay, so what do you think men prefer? And as you can see, they noted a 2.9, which is on the thinner side. What do you rate as ideal? And they put 2.8, which is even more thin. So that is their perception of what the female ideal body type is like. They ranked themselves as a 3.6, so they saw themselves as heavier. And then, of course, there is what men actually preferred was more of a 3.2. So what that shows is that women see themselves as much larger than what they consider ideal. And it is off of what the average score for what men actually preferred. What you can see on the men's side is that men scored themselves as a 4. What is their self-image? What they rated as ideal was a 4, and what they thought women preferred was a 4. Only women actually preferred more of a 3.7. But men overestimated basically how bulky they needed to be. They thought they needed to be bigger to attract women. I summarized a little bit of the research findings from that section for you. So the research findings indicate that people who view themselves as heavy tend to have lower self-esteem. What's SE? This is more true for women than men, as demonstrated in the research. Western culture teaches women to view their bodies as objects, which is part of objectification theory, which increases body shame and anxiety, which can lead to eating restrictions and eating disorders. Then the text cites 3 pieces of research, findings anyways, which state that women restrict eating to restore self-esteem, whereas they did not find the same in men commonly. Research has found that girls as young as in grade 8 believe they have to be thin to be popular with boys, and the research has also shown that girls by age 10 begin to diet to look thinner. That is the end of psychological aspects of hunger, and we'll move on to environmental and cultural factors. In this section, we'll see biological variables that influence eating that we just talked about. Humans are not so sensitive to. They are, but not so. We are more sensitive to environmental variables that influence eating. Some of the variables that they talk about are food availability. So in North America, there's an abundance of low-cost food, high-fat food, which has resulted in increased obesity rates. Food taste, variety, and serving size. Variety, they talk a little bit about at a buffet, right? When there's a huge variety of food to choose from, you tend to eat more. Serving size, as serving size increase, the amount of food that you eat increases, and there's a study on the next slide that we're going to go over. The smell and sight of food, how we're classically conditioned to when we smell and the sight of food makes us hungry. The presence of others is another variable. When we're at a table or at a dinner, we tend to take longer to eat and eat more. Then also the familiarity of food. So when we're eating foods that are more familiar to us, we tend to eat more. Okay, page 398 of your textbooks. This was a study where they took people who were about the same hungry, if you want to say it that way. So take a group of whatever, 200 people. I don't know how many people they used. They didn't get into specifics. Anyways, they randomly assigned them to 4 groups. So there's the 500 group, the 625 group, the 750 group, and the 1000 group. And they're big plates of macaroni and cheese. And they give these different sized portions to the people. I'm sure they were in different rooms where they couldn't see each other, although that's not stated, but anyways, I'm sure they were. So what they found is that people who had a plate of 500 grams of macaroni and cheese ate, say 345 grams of the macaroni and cheese on average. People in the next group were given 625 grams of macaroni and cheese, and they ate 370 about. The group that had 750 grams of macaroni and cheese on their plates ate 400 grams, and the group that had 1,000 grams of macaroni and cheese ate, say, 440 grams. What they're saying here, what they're finding is that just because they had more food on their plates, the availability of more food, people ate more. Largest portion size ate 100 grams more, which is 162 calories. The last section discusses obesity. So in Canada, 2019, 52.5% are either overweight or obese. BMI, body mass index. So overweight is considered a body mass index of over 25. Obese is considered a body mass index of greater than 30. Almost 2/3 of adult Canadians are overweight or obese. Among children, 30% of 5 to 17-year-olds are overweight or obese. Globally, obesity rates have tripled since 1975, and obesity poses a health risk, exposure to stereotypes and prejudices, referred to as the obesity stigma. What causes obesity? The causes are very complex and not well understood. One area they talk about are genetics. And what they're talking about there is that basal metabolism, you inherit your basal metabolism. You inherit your basal metabolic rate and the tendency to store energy either as fat or as lean tissue. Okay, so you inherit that. Yeah, I mean, you see people who seem to be able to eat as much as they want and not gain any weight, and then there's some people who simply can't do that. And much of that has to do with your basal metabolism that you inherit from your parents. Research shows genetic factors such as this account for 40 to 70% of variance in body mass among men and women. Researchers have found more than 200 genes identified as possible contributors. There's not going to be one gene that contributes to obesity, but likely a subset of many genes that contribute. Why have obesity rates tripled? Text talks about three main reasons. One, inexpensive, tasty foods and high in fat or carbohydrates are everywhere. It is very, very inexpensive, as you'll notice if you go through a drive-through. You can get a cheeseburger, say at McDonald's or Burger King, so I don't target anybody. You can get a cheeseburger or something like that, or small fries for $2. But if you want a salad, if you want to get a salad with chicken on it, it's $10. So it's a lot more expensive to eat healthy foods. So anyway, that makes eating healthy a challenge for some people. Also, our cultural value of getting the best value. So supersizing things, right? If you're going to pay $8 for a meal, then you want to supersize it and get even more value. So you're supersizing French fries and getting an extra large Coke. And then also due to decreased daily activity, due to technological advances. Kind of probably what we're all doing with COVID due to technological advances, and we're Zooming, even doing these videos. I can sit here all day long and do videos and not have to get out of my chair. So basically, I mean, obviously decreased energy expenditure and possible weight gain, I guess we'll find out. And then finally, dieting and weight loss. Not a lot in this section. I just pulled out some key points for you. Weight gain tends to promote more weight gain, which is unfortunate. Weight gain alters the body chemistry and energy expenditure. It also increases insulin, which increases the conversion of glucose to fat. Dieting slows basal metabolism. Body responds to food deprivation by decreasing your energy expenditure. So simply just reducing your food, not eating as much, slows down your basal metabolism. So you have to get around that. There's no consistent evidence that the body's energy-saving metabolic slowdown becomes more pronounced with each weight loss attempt. So this idea that every time you try to lose weight, you're going to bounce back. There's the yo-yo effect, right? So you start at 160, you diet, and then you yo-yo back, and instead of being 160, now you're going to be 165. That used to be called the yo-yo effect. There is no research base for that. There is no evidence for that. And then lastly, all of the data that we have, it comes from weight loss, a lot of it anyways, comes from weight loss centers and weight loss clinics. And you have to think about who goes there. People who go to weight loss clinics and weight loss centers are asking for help, and when they're doing these studies, they're still going there, right? People who lose weight on their own and are successful are not in the numbers because they're not reporting and they're not going to these things. So you have to think about the sample that's providing the data as well. Okay, so that includes the second part, hunger and weight regulation. We talked about the physiology of hunger. Remember the asterisk is there because that has 10 out of the 20 slides. You want to focus a little more on that. Psychological aspects of hunger, that was a little lighter, as well as the environmental and cultural factors and obesity. You will find the rest of the slides for parts 3 through 7 in the resource folder. And I will see you in the next video. Yeah. Good job and see you soon.